Good evening, Team UnJustified. Tonight we will be going all the way back to 1948. Who you are looking at in this picture is father and son. Not only are they father and son, they are also partners in crime. J.D. Dowdy, age 23 at the time, and his father, George Dowdy, age 68 at the time. George and J.D. committed a horrific crime at the expense of a very innocent person. They used this crime to actually try to profit big off of someone else's life. A stranger that they befriended. They tried to profit in the amount of $36,000. Now, $36,000 is a lot of money today. Can you imagine how far $36,000 would have went in the year of 1948? It would have obviously raised many eyebrows. Here you will see Walter Dorman. Walter is the man they befriended. He was the victim of their horrific crime. Let's get right into the story. In late October of 1948 in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, a house painter named Walter Dorman, 42 years old, was vacationing at a fishing camp near Tallulah in the northeast corner of Louisiana. It was near the Mississippi River, the Mississippi Delta, and Lake Providence. The fishing campground was very quiet, had very many lakes all coinciding with each other, so it seemed like the perfect little getaway for Walter. He was very excited to start spending time in his cabin at night and doing lots of fishing during the day. On a very rainy night, October the 22nd, J.D. Dowdy and Walter were seen together near his fishing cabin. Later, at around 11:30 p.m. or midnight, Walter entered his fishing cabin, but he was killed instantly when it exploded. Exploded is probably the wrong word. The cabin blew apart in several thousand pieces. The only thing left of Walter were his legs. That is the only body parts that remained of Walter Dorman. That was the only thing they had to identify him by. Relatives of Walter identified the legs as belonging to him. The Monroe News Star reported on October the 28th that relatives of young Walter confirmed the legs were the only remains of their brother and young son. He was like a brother to me, a grieving George Dowdy told a local newspaper reporter. Only 2 days after the explosion, Walter's wife reported him missing. Police then tracked Walter to the fishing camp where they discovered that the owner's son, J.D. Dowdy, had been killed in an explosion several days before, and the whole town was still talking about it since the blast was felt by all within a 5-mile radius. But since Walter wasn't there, police been asking questions, asking local people had they saw Walter around anywhere. Well, they learned that young Dowdy had a $36,000 life insurance policy that actually doubled in the event of an accident, making the policy claim $72,000. Well, this obviously raised more questions, and it prompted witnesses to start coming forward and talking. Some of them told investigators that J.D. had recently purchased a 50-pound case of dynamite. However, that really wasn't that strange, being that he lived along the river and fishermen did buy a lot of dynamite to use to catch fish. A cab driver came forward to report that on the night of the explosion, he drove 2 men within 1/2 mile of the rural fishing cabin. One of them was reportedly drunk. Both men fit the description of Walter Dorman and J.D. Dowdy. George Dowdy, the straw boss of a nearby plantation, was arrested 2 days after the explosion. After questioning, the older Dowdy was inconsistent with his explanations for the dynamite, the large life insurance policy for his son, his apparent lack of grief over his son's death, and, more importantly, his account for the unknown whereabouts of Walter Dorman. During intense interrogation, George was finally backed into the corner, and he confessed. He said their master plan was to have George declare the remains of Walter Dorman were that of his son J.D., and then use death certificate to collect the $36,000 in life insurance, which would have doubled to $72,000 because it was an accident. Okay, in 2020, that would be equivalent today to $390,000. So as you see, that's a lot of money. So it would definitely raise a lot of eyebrows. His son, J.D., had already been on the run when an all-points bulletin for his arrest went out over the wires. Described by all who knew him, he was not very bright. J.D. was captured November the 1st near the Louisiana-Texas border, where he had just left the home of his sister. At his trial, the prosecution called 50 witnesses and presented strong circumstantial evidence. Dowdy's court-appointed defense attorney called 5 witnesses. They were friends of J.D.'s, and they reported that he was goofy, weird, and unusual. They done this in an attempt to try to convince the jury that he was mentally deficient. And because of that, they were thinking that the judge and jury would decide that the death penalty would be too extreme and too cruel for someone who had such mental problems. Well, it didn't work. J.D. Dowdy was found guilty. He was eventually executed on January the 12th of 1951, still protesting his innocence. And instead of being electrocuted at the state prison in Angola, he was executed in a portable electric chair in Mason Parish, the parish for Tallulah. Interviewed several hours before his execution, Dowdy was asked how he felt, and he said, quote, "I hold no grudges, and I can't explain everything they have against me," unquote. As he was being executed, his mother and sister sat in their automobile parked across the street from the parish jail. They had visited with him the evening before his execution, but were not allowed to attend his execution. He was buried in his mother's hometown of Ringling, Ohio. This concludes our bedtime story for tonight, the story of J.D. Dowdy and his father, George Dowdy. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a very, very great night and the sweetest of dreams. Good night, everyone. This is UnJustified.